Listen carefully. Right now, as you're watching this, you believe you are someone. A name, a past, a story, a life. You believe there is a you inside, watching, thinking, feeling. But what if that you is not real? Not in the way you've always believed. In the teachings of Gautama Buddha, there is a truth so unsettling that most people never dare to look at it directly. Not because it's hidden, but because it destroys the illusion they depend on. Because if what Buddha said is true, then your identity, your personality, your entire sense of self is nothing more than a process, changing, shifting, never staying the same, even for a moment. And the part that scares people the most is this: if there is no fixed you, then what exactly are you protecting? Tonight, this is not just a video. This is a moment of confrontation. Because by the end of this, you may not find yourself. You may lose the idea of who you thought you were. And in that loss, you might discover something deeper, something silent, something that has been here all along, watching, waiting for you to finally see it. The self you protect is not real. From the very beginning of your life, something quiet started happening. You were given a name, and at first, it meant nothing. It was just a sound people used to call you, but slowly, that sound became an identity. Every time someone spoke it, you responded. Every time someone described you, you listened. And piece by piece, without ever questioning it, you began to believe, this is who I am. But pause for a moment. Before anyone gave you a name, who were you? Before anyone told you what is right or wrong, strong or weak, worthy or unworthy, what were you? There was awareness. There was experience. But there was no fixed identity attached to it. And this is where the illusion begins. What you call yourself is not something you found. It is something you slowly built out of memory, out of conditioning, out of repetition. You remember certain moments, and you say, that happened to me. You feel certain emotions, and you say, that is how I am. You think certain thoughts, and you say, that is who I am. But look closely. Memories change. The way you remember your past today is not the same as how you saw it years ago. Emotions rise and fall like waves. A feeling that once defined you disappears without asking your permission. Thoughts come into your mind without invitation and leave just as quietly. So tell me honestly, if your memories are unstable, if your emotions are temporary, if your thoughts are uncontrollable, then where is the solid you inside all of this? You say, this is me. But what exactly are you pointing to? If you try to hold on to your identity, you will notice something unsettling. The tighter you try to define yourself, the more it slips away. Because there is no single point you can isolate and say, this is permanently me. There is only movement. There is only change. There is only a continuous flow of experience, being mistaken for something solid. This is what Gautama Buddha saw so clearly. He did not say you don't exist at all. He pointed to something more subtle, more precise. He showed that what you call a self is not a fixed entity, but a process, a stream, a pattern that is constantly forming and dissolving in every moment. And yet, despite this constant change, you feel like the same person. Why? Because your mind connects the dots. It takes separate moments and weaves them into a story with a main character, a character you call me. But a story, no matter how detailed, is still a story. And the moment you start believing the story is solid and permanent, you begin to suffer. Because now, you must protect it. You must defend your identity. You must prove your worth. You must hold on to how others see you. And every time life challenges that image, you feel shaken. Not because something real was damaged, but because an idea was threatened. Think about it. When someone criticizes you, what hurts? Is it your body? Or is it the image you have of yourself? When you fail, what breaks? Is it something real inside you? Or is it the identity you were trying to maintain? This is the trap. You are not suffering because of what happens. You are suffering because of what you believe yourself to be. And once you begin to see this clearly, something starts to loosen. You don't feel the same need to defend every opinion. You don't feel the same fear of being misunderstood. You don't feel the same pressure to be someone specific all the time, because you realize there is no fixed someone there. There is only experience, unfolding moment by moment. And in that realization, there is a quiet kind of freedom, not loud, not dramatic, but deep, because for the first time, you are no longer trying to hold together something that was never solid to begin with. You are simply here, without the weight of constantly proving who you are, and that is where the illusion begins to fade. Attachment creates the illusion of a self. Look carefully at your life, and you will notice something subtle but constant. You are always holding on to something, not just physically, but internally. You hold on to your identity. You hold on to your opinions. You hold on to your relationships. You hold on to the way you want things to be. And without even realizing it, this holding becomes your sense of self. You say, "This is mine." And slowly, without question, it turns into, "This is me." But pause for a moment. What happens when something you hold on to begins to change or slip away? A relationship ends. A plan fails. Someone sees you differently than you expected. Why does it hurt so deeply? It is not just because something changed. It is because something you were holding on to was quietly supporting your identity. And when it moves, you feel like you are losing a part of yourself. This is what the Buddha pointed to with great clarity. He saw that the feeling of a solid self is not something that exists on its own. It is something created through attachment. Attachment is not just desire. It is identification. It is the moment when you no longer simply experience something, but begin to define yourself through it. You are not just feeling sadness. You become a sad person. You are not just experiencing success. You become a successful person. You are not just having thoughts. You become your thoughts. And the deeper this identification becomes, the more real the self begins to feel. But look closely again. Everything you attach to is unstable. People change. Circumstances shift. Emotions rise and fall. Even your own beliefs transform over time. So if your sense of self is built on things that are constantly changing, then what happens when those things inevitably move? You feel shaken. You feel lost. You feel like something inside you is breaking. But what is really happening is much simpler and much more honest. An illusion is being exposed. You were never those things to begin with. You were only holding on to them. And the pain you feel is not the loss of something real within you. It is the resistance to letting go of what was never yours to keep. This is why the Buddha did not teach people to control the world. He taught them to understand their attachment to it. Because the problem is not that things change. The problem is that you expect them not to. You expect people to remain the same. You expect situations to stay stable. You expect your identity to remain intact. But reality does not follow expectations. It moves constantly. And the more tightly you try to hold it still, the more tension you create within yourself. Now look at the opposite. What happens when you stop clinging? When you allow experiences to come and go, without turning them into identity, there is a different kind of peace. You still feel, you still care, you still live fully, but there is no longer that constant pressure to hold everything together. There is no fear that you will lose yourself, because you begin to see there was no fixed self there to lose. Only moments, only experiences, only a continuous unfolding that was never meant to be owned. And in that understanding, something quietly changes. You stop asking, "How do I keep this?" And you begin to see, this was never mine. Not in a cold or empty way, but in a way that releases you. Because the less you try to hold on to life, the less life feels like it can break you. And in that space, the illusion of a permanent self begins to dissolve. The mind is a storytelling machine. There is a voice in your head that never seems to stop. From the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep, it is there, commenting, judging, explaining, replaying. It tells you what happened, what it means, and most importantly, what it says about you. At first, You don't question it. You assume that voice is you, because it sounds like you, because it speaks in your language, because it feels personal. But look more carefully. If that voice were truly you, would it speak without your permission? Would it repeat the same thoughts over and over, even when you don't want it to? Would it create fear, doubt, and confusion, and then expect you to believe it? There is something deeper happening here. The mind is not just thinking. The mind is constantly constructing a story about your life, a story about your past, a story about who you are. And at the center of that story is a character. That character has a name, a history, a personality. That character feels real. But what you rarely notice is this. The character is being written moment by moment. Every memory you recall is slightly reshaped. Every emotion you feel colors the way you see yourself. Every thought that appears adds another line to the story. And slowly, this ongoing narrative becomes something you believe is solid. You begin to say, "This is me." But is it? Look at how quickly your inner story can change. One moment, you feel confident. Your mind tells you you're capable, you've grown, you're strong. And in that moment, that feels like your identity. Then something small happens. A mistake, a rejection, a memory. And suddenly, the story shifts. Now the voice says, "You're not enough. You always fail. This is who you are." The same mind, the same voice, two completely different identities. So which one is real? Or are they both just stories? This is what the Buddha saw with clarity. He observed that the mind is always moving, always producing thoughts, always creating meaning. But nowhere in that movement is there a fixed self. There is only a continuous flow of mental activity, being mistaken for something stable. You are not the story being told. You are the one aware of the story. And that awareness does not change when the story changes. When your thoughts are calm, awareness is there. When your thoughts are chaotic, awareness is still there. When your mind is full of fear, awareness remains untouched. This is something you can observe directly. Sit quietly for a moment. Watch your thoughts. Don't try to stop them. Just notice. A thought appears. Then it fades. Another thought comes. Then it disappears. They come and go, like clouds passing through the sky. Now ask yourself, if you can observe your thoughts, can you really be those thoughts? Because the one who is watching is not the same as what is being watched. And this is where the illusion begins to weaken. The more you believe your thoughts, the more real your identity feels. But the more you observe your thoughts, the more you see their impermanence. And slowly, the grip of the story begins to loosen. You no longer feel the need to believe every sentence your mind creates. You no longer feel trapped inside every narrative it builds. Because you begin to understand something simple but powerful. The mind is a storyteller. And stories, no matter how convincing, are not the truth. They are just words, appearing and disappearing in something much deeper that has been quietly present all along. There is no permanent soul, only change. There is something you have been assuming your entire life, something so deeply rooted in your thinking that you rarely question it. You assume that somewhere inside you there is something permanent, something solid, something that remains the same, no matter what happens. You may call it yourself. You may call it your soul. You may not even have a word for it, but you feel it. It feels like there is a center, a core, an unchanging you behind everything you experience. But look closely, not at your ideas about yourself, but at your actual experience. Right now, in this moment, what is truly stable? Your body? It has been changing since the day you were born. Every cell has aged, replaced itself, transformed. The face you carry today is not the one you had years ago. Even now, it is slowly shifting beyond your control. Your emotions? They rise and fall, often without warning. One moment, you feel calm. The next, something small triggers irritation. A memory appears, and suddenly sadness fills your chest. Then, just as quietly, it fades. Your thoughts? They come endlessly, uninvited, unpredictable. One thought replaces another, sometimes contradicting what you believed just moments before. So where is this permanent you hiding? If you search honestly, you won't find something stable. You will find movement. You will find change. You will find a constant flow that never stops. This is what Gautama Buddha observed with deep clarity. He saw that everything we experience is marked by impermanence. Nothing holds its shape forever. Nothing stays fixed. And this includes what we call the self. But here is where the mind resists. Because if there is no permanent self, if there is no fixed soul, then what are you? The question feels unsettling, almost threatening. Because for so long, your sense of security has been tied to the idea that something about you is stable, something you can rely on, something that defines you. But the truth is not meant to comfort your assumptions. It is meant to reveal what is real. And what is real is change. Not as an occasional event, but as the very nature of existence. Everything you experience is in motion. Even the feeling of being you is not constant. There are moments when you feel strong, moments when you feel lost, moments when you feel clear, moments when you feel confused. Each state feels like you while it lasts, but none of them stay. And yet, despite all this movement, there is a habit, a deep, unconscious habit. The habit of taking what is temporary and treating it as permanent. You feel an emotion, and you say, "This is who I am." You think a thought, and you say, "This defines me." You go through an experience, and you build an identity around it. But this is like trying to carve something solid out of water. No matter how hard you try, it slips through your hands, because it was never meant to stay. This is where suffering begins, not in change itself, but in your resistance to it. You want things to remain the same. You want people to stay as they were. You want your life to follow a predictable path. You want your identity to remain stable. But reality does not cooperate. It moves endlessly. And every time it moves in a way you don't expect, you feel tension. You feel discomfort. You feel loss. But what are you really losing? If nothing was ever permanent, then what exactly is being taken from you? Look deeper. When something changes, what hurts is not just the event itself. It is the collapse of the idea you built around it. You believed something would last. You believed something defined you. And when that belief is challenged, it feels like something inside you is breaking. But what is breaking is not something real. It is the illusion of permanence. This is why the Buddha did not teach people to stop change. He taught them to see it clearly. Because when you truly understand impermanence, not as an idea, but as a direct experience, something begins to shift. You stop expecting life to stay the same. You stop clinging to moments as if they will last forever. You stop building your identity on things that are constantly moving. And in that shift, there is a strange kind of peace. Not because everything becomes stable, but because you no longer need it to be. You begin to flow with life instead of resisting it. You allow things to arise and pass without trying to hold them. And most importantly, you stop trying to find a permanent self in a world that is entirely impermanent. This does not make life empty. It makes it real. Because for the first time, you are no longer relating to life through illusion. You are seeing it as it is. A continuous unfolding, a movement without a fixed center, a process without a permanent owner. And in that realization, the question changes. You no longer ask, "How do I preserve myself?" You begin to ask, "What is happening right now?" And that question does not lead to fear. It leads to clarity. Because when you stop chasing something permanent, you finally begin to understand what is always present. Not a fixed self, not a soul that never changes, but a living experience that is never the same and was never meant to be. Suffering comes from clinging to I. If you look closely at your life, you will begin to notice a pattern, not in what happens to you, but in how you relate to what happens. Two people can go through the same experience and feel completely different levels of pain. One feels broken, the other remains steady. So what creates this difference? It is not the situation. It is the sense of I attached to it. Almost every form of suffering carries the same hidden structure. This is happening to me. This should not be happening to me. Why is this happening to me? That small word, me, carries more weight than you realize. Because the stronger that me feels, the more everything becomes personal. And when everything becomes personal, everything begins to hurt more. Look at how the mind reacts. Someone criticizes you. Immediately, something tightens inside. Not because words have physical force, but because they touch an identity you are protecting, an image of yourself, an idea of who you believe you are. And the moment that image is challenged, you feel pain. But what exactly was hurt? Was it something real and solid? Or was it an idea being threatened? Now look at another situation. You fail at something. A plan doesn't work. A goal slips away. Again, the pain is not just in the event itself. It is in the story that follows. I am not good enough. I always fail. This defines me. Notice how quickly the experience becomes identity. A single moment becomes a statement about who you are. And once that happens, the suffering deepens. Because now, you are not just dealing with what happened. You are carrying what it means about you. This is what the Buddha saw with remarkable clarity. He saw that suffering does not come from life alone. It comes from identification, from the constant habit of taking every experience and tying it back to a solid self. But what if that self is not as solid as you think? What if it is just a pattern of thoughts, continuously reinforced? Then what happens to suffering when that pattern begins to loosen? Something subtle begins to change. The same events may still occur. People may still speak harshly. Situations may still fall apart. Pain, as a natural response, may still arise. But the extra layer, the mental resistance, the personal attachment, begins to fade. You no longer feel like everything is happening to you. You begin to see that things are simply happening. This does not make you indifferent. It makes you clear. Because when you are not constantly defending a fixed identity, you are no longer reacting from fear. You are responding from understanding. Think about how much energy is spent protecting the idea of I, trying to prove yourself, trying to be seen in a certain way, trying to avoid judgment, trying to maintain an image. This effort is endless because the image is never truly stable. It needs constant reinforcement, constant validation, constant protection, and that constant effort is exhausting. Now imagine what happens when that effort begins to drop, when you no longer feel the need to protect every opinion, when you no longer feel threatened by every disagreement, when you no longer build your worth on temporary outcomes. There is a lightness, not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer carrying the extra weight of identity. This is the freedom the Buddha pointed toward, not the removal of all pain, but the end of unnecessary suffering, the kind of suffering that comes from clinging, from holding tightly to something that was never solid, from insisting on a permanent I in a world that is constantly changing. And when that clinging begins to dissolve, you start to see something clearly. Pain is part of life, but suffering is something you add through resistance, through attachment, through identification. And once you see this, not just as an idea, but as a living truth, a quiet shift takes place. You stop asking, how do I avoid pain? And you begin to understand, how am I creating suffering? That understanding changes everything. Because now, the focus is not on controlling the outside world, but on seeing through the illusion inside. And as that illusion weakens, so does the suffering tied to it. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, like a knot slowly unraveling. After being held tight for a very long time, and in that unraveling, there is space, there is ease, there is a kind of peace. That does not depend on protecting who you think you are, because you are no longer holding on to something that can be broken. You are simply experiencing without turning every moment into me. And that is where suffering begins to end. You are not the thinker. You are the observer. Right now, something is happening inside you that you rarely stop to question. Thoughts are appearing, not slowly, not carefully, but continuously, one after another. Some of them make sense. Some of them repeat. Some of them disturb you. Some of them feel comforting. But look closely at the nature of these thoughts. Did you choose the next thought that just appeared? Did you decide its exact timing, its exact wording, its exact feeling? Or did it simply arise on its own? This is where the illusion begins to crack. Because for most of your life, you have believed something without examining it. That you are the thinker of your thoughts. That every thought in your mind belongs to you and is created by you. But if you observe carefully, that belief starts to weaken. Sit quietly for a moment. Do nothing. Don't try to control anything. Just watch. A thought appears, then another, then another. They come without asking. They stay for a moment, then they disappear. And as you watch this, a simple question begins to form. If you are truly the one thinking these thoughts, why can't you stop them at will? Why do unwanted thoughts continue to return, even when you try to push them away? Why does the mind keep moving, even when you want silence? There is something deeper happening. The mind is functioning, just like the heart beats, just like the lungs breathe. Thoughts arise as part of a natural process. But you are not that process. You are aware of it. This distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. Because as long as you believe you are the thinker, you will feel responsible for every thought that appears. You will judge yourself for negative thinking. You will identify with every idea that passes through your mind. And slowly, your sense of self becomes entangled with your thoughts. I am anxious. I am not enough. I am this kind of person. But what if these are not statements of truth? What if they are just passing events, being misinterpreted as identity? This is what Gautama Buddha pointed toward. He did not ask people to believe something blindly. He asked them to observe, to look directly at their experience without assumptions. And what he discovered was something incredibly simple, yet deeply transformative. Thoughts are not the self. They are objects appearing in awareness, just like sounds, just like sensations, just like emotions. And anything that can be observed cannot be the observer. This is not a concept. It is something you can verify right now. Notice a thought as it appears. Instead of following it, just watch it. See how it forms. See how it lingers. See how it fades. Now ask yourself, if you can see it come and go, can it really be you? Because you remain, even as the thought disappears. Another thought comes. Different content, different feeling, but still, it is observed. And again, it passes. But you are still here, unchanged, watching. This watching is not something you create. It is already present. It has always been present. Even when you were lost in thought, even when you were overwhelmed, even when you felt completely identified with your mind, there was still something quietly aware of it all. That awareness does not argue. It does not judge. It does not create stories. It simply knows. This is what separates you from the mind, not as a belief, but as a direct experience. And once you begin to see this clearly, something powerful happens. The grip of thoughts begins to loosen. You no longer feel the need to believe every thought that appears. You no longer react automatically to every mental impulse. There is space, a small gap between the thought and your response. And in that gap, there is freedom. Because for the first time, you are not being pulled in every direction by the mind. You are watching it, calmly, silently, without becoming it. This does not mean thoughts stop completely. They may continue. They may still appear frequently, but they no longer define you. They no longer control you in the same way. Because you have seen something clearly, you are not the thinker. You are not the voice in your head. You are not the constant stream of mental activity. You are the awareness in which all of it appears. And that awareness is not disturbed by the content it observes. A storm may pass through the sky, but the sky itself is not damaged. In the same way, thoughts may arise, emotions may move, Experiences may unfold, but the awareness that sees them remains untouched. And in recognizing this, a deep shift begins. You stop trying to fix every thought. You stop trying to control every mental movement. You stop fighting the mind as if it were your enemy. Instead, you understand it. You observe it. You allow it. And in that allowing, there is peace. Not because everything becomes silent, but because you are no longer lost in the noise. You are no longer inside the storm. You are aware of it. And that awareness does not suffer in the same way the mind does, because it is not attached. It is not identified. It is simply present, watching, always here. Even before a thought appears, and even after it fades away, freedom begins when the illusion ends. For most of your life, you have been searching for clarity, searching for peace, searching for something that finally feels stable, something that makes everything make sense. And almost without noticing, that search has always been centered around one idea: me. How can I improve myself? How can I fix myself? How can I become something better, stronger, more complete? It sounds reasonable. It sounds necessary. But hidden inside that search is an assumption you have never fully questioned, that there is a fixed you that needs to be perfected, that somewhere inside there is a solid identity waiting to be improved, protected, fulfilled. But what if that assumption is the very thing keeping you trapped? What if the freedom you are searching for is not found by strengthening the self, but by seeing through it? This is the turning point in the teaching of Gautama Buddha. Not the improvement of the self, but the understanding that what you call self is not what it appears to be. Because as long as you believe in a fixed identity, you will always feel limited by it. You will measure your life against it. You will carry its past. You will fear its future. And every experience will be filtered through it. But the moment that identity begins to loosen, something unexpected happens. You don't become empty. You don't become lost. You become free. Free from the constant need to define yourself. Free from the pressure to maintain an image. Free from the fear of being someone or not being enough. Because the entire structure that created those pressures begins to dissolve. Think about how much of your life has been shaped by trying to be someone, trying to fit into an idea, trying to match an image, trying to live up to expectations, either your own or others. And every time you fall short, you feel it deeply, not because of what happened, but because of what it means about you. Now imagine what happens when that you is no longer fixed. When it is no longer something you have to constantly protect or prove. There is a lightness, a quiet sense of release, because there is nothing rigid left to defend. This does not mean you stop living. It does not mean you stop caring. It means you are no longer trapped inside a narrow definition of yourself. You can respond to life more openly, more honestly, without the constant filter of identity. This is where real freedom begins. Not in controlling everything around you, but in no longer being controlled by the idea of who you are supposed to be. And yet, this realization is not easy, because the mind resists it. The mind wants something solid, something it can hold on to. It wants a clear answer to the question, if there is no self, then what am I? But the answer is not something the mind can grasp in a simple definition, because it is not a concept. It is an experience of being, without needing to turn that being into an identity. When you stop labeling every moment, when you stop turning every experience into mine, when you stop building a story around everything that happens, what remains? There is still awareness, there is still presence, there is still life, unfolding, but there is no longer that constant tension of holding it all together as me. This is not something you achieve. It is something you recognize, something that has been there all along, hidden beneath layers of thought, habit, and belief. And once you begin to see it, even slightly, you cannot completely unsee it. You begin to notice how often the mind tries to rebuild the identity, how quickly it returns to labeling, judging, defining. But now, there is a difference. You see it happening. You are no longer completely lost in it. And that seeing creates space. A space where you are not automatically reacting. A space where you are not fully identified. A space where freedom can exist. This freedom is not dramatic. It does not come with loud realizations or constant bliss. It is quiet, subtle, but deeply stable, because it does not depend on circumstances. It does not depend on success or failure. It does not depend on how others see you. It comes from understanding something fundamental, that the self you were trying to protect was never fixed to begin with. And when that understanding deepens, something inside you begins to relax. You no longer carry your past in the same way. You no longer fear the future in the same way, because there is no solid identity being dragged through time. There is only this moment, alive, unfolding, free from the weight of becoming someone. And in that, there is peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing needs to be held as permanent. Nothing needs to be turned into me. And that is the quiet truth most people overlook. Freedom does not come from finding yourself. It comes from realizing there was never a fixed self to find. Only a flow, mistaken for something solid. Only a story, believed to be permanent. And when that illusion begins to fall away, what remains is not emptiness. What remains is openness, clarity, and a kind of freedom that does not need to be protected, because it was never built on something fragile. It was always here, waiting to be seen. Letting go is not loss, it is clarity. There is something you have been taught your entire life, something that feels so natural, you rarely question it. That letting go means losing something, losing control, losing meaning, losing a part of yourself. And because of this belief, you hold on. You hold on to people. You hold on to outcomes. You hold on to identities. You hold on to the way things used to be, even when it hurts, even when it is no longer true, even when you can feel, deep inside, that something has already changed. You still hold on. Why? Because it feels safer to hold something painful than to face the unknown without it. But look closely at what holding on actually does. It creates tension, not just in your mind, but in your entire experience. You replay moments that are already gone. You resist changes that have already happened. You try to keep something alive that reality has already moved beyond. And in that effort, you suffer, not because life is cruel, but because you are trying to freeze what cannot be frozen. This is where the teaching becomes very clear. According to Gautama Buddha, the problem is not that things pass away. The problem is that you expect them to stay. You expect feelings to last. You expect relationships to remain unchanged. You expect your identity to be consistent. But everything you are holding on to is already moving, already shifting, already dissolving, moment by moment. And the tighter you hold, the more painful that movement becomes. Think of it like this. Imagine trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because it was never meant to be held that way. Life is the same. Experiences are meant to be lived, not possessed. But the mind does not understand this easily. It turns everything into something to keep. This is mine. This defines me. I can't lose this. And without realizing it, you turn moments into attachments. You turn experiences into identity. You turn change into fear. But what if letting go is not what you think it is? What if letting go is not about losing something valuable, but about seeing something clearly? Because when you truly see that something is not permanent, not stable, not truly yours, holding on to it begins to feel unnatural. You don't have to force yourself to let go. It happens on its own, like releasing something you finally realize you were never meant to carry. This is the difference between forced attachment and understanding. Forced detachment feels like denial. It feels like you are pushing something away, even though you still believe you need it. But understanding is different. Understanding dissolves the need to hold on. Because the illusion behind the attachment is no longer convincing, you begin to see that what you were holding was not as solid as you believed. And once that clarity arises, letting go is not painful. It is relieving, because you are no longer fighting reality. You are no longer resisting what is already happening. Now look at your own life. Think about something you are still holding on to. A memory, a person, an identity, a version of yourself that no longer exists. Why are you holding it? Is it because it is still real? Or is it because you are afraid of what remains without it? This is where honesty becomes important, because letting go is not about removing something from your life. It is about removing the illusion that you need it to be whole. And when that illusion begins to fade, you discover something surprising. You are still here, even without that attachment, still aware, still present, still complete in this moment. This is what makes letting go powerful, not because it takes something away, but because it reveals what was never dependent on it. You begin to trust the flow of life more. You begin to move with change, instead of resisting it. You begin to experience moments fully, without the constant urge to hold them forever. And in that way, life becomes lighter, not empty, not distant, but free. Free from the constant pressure of holding everything together. Free from the fear that something essential can be taken from you. Because you see clearly now, nothing was ever yours to keep. Not in a way that makes it permanent. Not in a way that defines you forever. Everything arises, and everything passes. And this is not something to fear. It is something to understand. Because when you truly understand it, letting go is no longer an act of loss. It becomes an act of alignment. Alignment with the way things actually are. And in that alignment, there is peace. Not because nothing changes, but because you are no longer trying to stop it. You are allowing it. And in that allowing, you are no longer carrying what was never meant to be carried. You are simply present with what is here and at ease with what is leaving. And that is where clarity begins. The desire to become is the root of restlessness. There is a quiet tension that follows you almost everywhere. Even when nothing is wrong, even when life is calm, there is still something unsettled inside. A feeling that something is missing. A feeling that you should be somewhere else, someone else, something more. And so, without even noticing, you begin to move. Not physically, but psychologically. You begin to chase. I need to improve. I need to become better. I need to fix myself. One day, I will finally feel complete. This constant movement toward a future version of yourself feels natural. It feels like growth. It feels like purpose. But look more closely. Is it really growth? Or is it a subtle form of dissatisfaction? Because hidden inside the desire to become something is the belief that who you are right now is not enough, that this moment is incomplete, that something essential is missing and must be found later. This is what creates restlessness. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are never fully here. Your mind is always projecting forward, always creating an image of a better version of yourself, and then quietly telling you, until you become that, you are not complete. This is an endless cycle, because the moment you reach one goal, another appears. The moment you become something, you begin chasing the next version. There is no final point, no lasting satisfaction, because the movement itself is driven by a sense of lack. And as long as that sense of lack remains, the search will never end. This is what Gautama Buddha saw so clearly. He did not reject growth. He did not reject effort, but he pointed to something deeper, that the constant desire to become is rooted in the illusion of a fixed self, a self that can be improved, perfected, completed. But if there is no fixed self, then what exactly are you trying to complete? Look carefully. When you say, I want to become better, who is this I? Is it stable? Is it unchanging? Or is it just another idea formed by the mind? Because if the self you are trying to improve is itself changing moment by moment, then the entire chase becomes unstable. You are trying to perfect something that does not stay the same long enough to be perfected. And this is why the feeling of not enough never fully disappears. Because it is not being solved at the root. It is being carried forward. into every new version of yourself. Now pause. For a moment, stop trying to become anything. Stop projecting yourself into the future. Stop measuring this moment against an imagined version of how it should be. Just be here. Notice what is present, without adding anything to it. There may still be thoughts. There may still be feelings. But without the movement of becoming, there is something else. Something quieter. Something more stable. A simple sense of being. Not becoming. Not improving. Not lacking. Just existing as this moment unfolds. And in that space, the restlessness begins to soften. Because restlessness needs a direction. It needs something to chase. But when there is no destination being imagined, no version of yourself being pursued, that movement loses its energy. This does not mean you stop living. It does not mean you stop growing. It means growth is no longer driven by dissatisfaction. It arises naturally, from clarity, from understanding, not from the feeling that you are incomplete. There is a profound difference here. Growth driven by lack feels tense. It feels urgent. It feels like something must be fixed. But growth that arises from presence feels natural. It unfolds without pressure. It is not about becoming someone else. It is about understanding what is already here. And this understanding changes your relationship with time. You are no longer constantly leaning into the future. You are not waiting for a moment where everything finally feels right. You begin to see that the idea of "one day I will be complete" is just another thought, another story created by the mind. And like all stories, it pulls you away from what is actually happening now. But reality is always here, not in the future, not in the version of yourself you are trying to become, but in this moment, unfinished, unfixed, yet complete in its own way. This is difficult for the mind to accept, because the mind wants progress. It wants a clear path. It wants a goal to reach. But life does not move in that way. It unfolds, without needing to become something else. And when you begin to see this, even slightly, the pressure begins to ease. You no longer feel like you are constantly falling behind. You no longer feel like you are missing something essential, because you realize there was never a final version of you to reach. There was never a moment where everything would be permanently complete. There is only this continuous flow that was never meant to settle into a fixed identity. And in that realization, something quiet shifts. You stop chasing yourself. You stop trying to arrive at a place that does not exist. You begin to move through life without the constant weight of becoming. And in that, there is a different kind of peace. Not the peace of achieving everything, but the peace of no longer needing to, because you are no longer trying to turn life into something fixed. You are allowing it to unfold, moment by moment, without resistance, without the pressure to become. And that is where restlessness begins to fade, not because you found something missing, but because you stopped believing that something was missing in the first place. Silence reveals what the mind cannot understand. There is something you have been avoiding, without even realizing it. Not noise from the outside, but noise from within. The constant movement of thought, the endless commentary, the need to fill every moment with something, anything, just to avoid stillness. Because when everything becomes quiet, something unfamiliar begins to appear, and the mind does not know what to do with it. So it reacts. It searches for distraction. It creates new thoughts. It pulls you back into memory, or pushes you toward the future. Anything to avoid staying in silence. But why? Why is silence so uncomfortable? Why does the mind resist it so strongly? Because in silence, the structure of the self begins to weaken. The voice that constantly tells you who you are begins to fade. The stories that define you lose their strength. And without those stories, without that constant inner narration, something feels missing. It feels like you are losing yourself. But look deeper. Are you really losing something real? Or are you simply losing the noise that was creating the illusion? This is where the teaching becomes very subtle. According to Gautama Buddha, truth is not something the mind can construct. It is not something you arrive at through endless thinking, because the mind itself is part of the movement, part of the change, part of the illusion. So how can it grasp something beyond itself? It cannot. And this is why silence becomes essential, not as an escape, but as a way of seeing clearly. When the mind becomes quiet, even for a moment, you begin to notice something that was always there, something that does not depend on thought, something that does not need words, a simple awareness, still, present, unmoving, even as everything else changes. This awareness is not something you create. It is not something you imagine. It is already here, but it is constantly covered by the activity of the mind, by the endless stream of thinking that keeps pulling your attention outward. And because of this, you begin to believe that the noise is necessary, that thinking is who you are, that without it, nothing remains. But this is not true. When the thoughts slow down, when the mental movement softens, you do not disappear. You remain, not as a concept, not as a defined identity, but as a presence, clear, aware, without needing to say, "This is me." This is what makes silence so powerful. It does not give you answers. It removes the need for them, because the questions themselves were created by the mind, and when the mind is quiet, the urgency behind those questions fades. You are no longer trying to figure everything out. You are no longer trying to define yourself. You are simply aware. Now, the mind will try to interfere. It will try to turn even this into a concept. It will say, "This is awareness. This is the truth. This is what I have found." But the moment you turn it into a thought, you move away from it. Because what is real here cannot be captured in words. It can only be experienced directly, silently, without interpretation. This is why silence is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is something you return to again and again, not as a practice of control, but as a recognition of what is always present beneath the noise. And slowly, as you begin to trust this silence, your relationship with the mind begins to change. You no longer depend on it to feel complete. You no longer believe every thought it produces. You begin to see it for what it is, a tool, a function, something useful, but not something that defines you. And in that understanding, the need for constant thinking begins to fade. Not completely, but enough that it no longer dominates your experience. There is space now, space between thoughts, space between reactions, space where you can simply observe without immediately becoming involved. And in that space, there is peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from controlling everything, but the kind that comes from no longer needing to. Because silence shows you something directly, that beneath all the movement, all the noise, all the stories, there is something stable, not a fixed self, not a permanent soul, but a presence that does not depend on identity, a presence that is not affected by the changing content of the mind. And once you begin to sense this, even slightly, everything starts to shift. You are no longer searching for answers in the same way. You are no longer trying to build a perfect version of yourself. You are no longer caught in every thought that arises, because you have seen something deeper, something that does not come and go, something that does not need to be created, only noticed. And that noticing happens in silence, not the silence of the outside world, but the silence that appears when the mind stops interfering, when it stops trying to define, control, explain, and simply allows what is here to be seen. This is not an escape from life. It is a deeper contact with it, because for the first time, you are no longer relating to life through constant interpretation. You are experiencing it directly, without the filter of thought, without the pressure of identity, just as it is. And in that, there is a clarity that the mind could never produce, because it was never meant to be understood through thinking, only through silence. Before you leave, pause for a moment. Don't rush back into noise. Don't reach for distraction just yet. Just sit and notice. All the thoughts that usually define you, all the labels you carry, all the stories you've been repeating for years. Look at them carefully. Are they really you? Or are they just things you've been holding on to. Because if what Gautama Buddha taught is true, then there is no fixed self to protect, no permanent identity to defend, only a flow, only a movement, only this moment, unfolding. And behind all of it, there is something quiet, something that doesn't change when your thoughts change, something that doesn't break when your identity is challenged, something that simply watches, without fear, without resistance, without needing to become anything. So maybe you were never meant to find yourself. Maybe you were meant to see that there was never a fixed self to find. And in that realization, there is a different kind of freedom. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Because for the first time, you are no longer trying to hold together something that was never solid. You are simply here, and that is enough.